the Lord intervened right when I was already in my third phase to become an FBI agent. I was already interviewing with the CIA. I was getting ready. I was for this plan that I created for myself of justice and strength and being that woman.
Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Called Women podcast. I'm your host, Natasha Miller, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Vanessa Cruz. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor, a coach, a mentor, and the owner of the Remedy Counseling Center. One thing that I admire and love about Vanessa and her mission is to truly help women experience breakthrough in every area of their life. Vanessa, welcome to the Call Women podcast.
Hi, Natasha. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Okay. So I went ahead and shared your accolades and your professional career. I would love for you to share a bit more about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm a wife. I'm a mother, and I don't take that lightly in saying a mother because it was a long road to becoming a mother. But here I am with a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old because God is faithful. And so, on the real, like as just a real person out on this pilgrimage like everybody else, I'm just loving God, loving my husband and loving my children, homeschooling and learning what that is, learning to be a mother still,
I love that. And I loved how you used the words pilgrimage, because that is what we all are truly on. It's a journey, and it's going to have its moments of, valleys and mountaintops and seasons of desert. So I would love, for you to share, Vanessa, because I was just so taken aback by your personal testimony and your story of how you encountered God and how you accepted Jesus into your life. So I would love for you to share with our audience, when did you know that God was calling you to be set apart?
Ooh. Okay, so I think as a trauma specialist, as somebody who's a counselor, I just want to put out a trigger warning right now. I'm going to keep it real. Yeah. And a lot of my background has a lot to do with sexual molestation and things like that. So I'm not going to go into detail, but that is part of my testimony. And and that is in part how God brought me to himself. So how I came to the Lord, by the time I set foot into a church and said, yes, Lord, I was already 24 years old. So I lived a lot of life. So I grew up in the north side city of Chicago. And right now the north side of Chicago is like real bougie, and it's nice. And that's not how it was when I was growing up. When I grew up, there was gangs in every corner. There was Latin kings walking to school, like there's gang banging happening. So that's kind of the environment that I grew up in. I wasn't necessarily caught up into that, but that's just part of the environment. So I've always been sort of an inner city girl. And I had 2 different Hispanic, we got Puerto Ricans, we got the Mexicans, and I am both. I came from a Puerto Rican mother, a Mexican father. That's like oil and water. They usually don't mix. So there's that contrast already that I'm born into. Catholic, we were Catholic, quote unquote Catholic. We rarely made it to Mass. And if we did, it was on a holiday. So the things of God were not necessarily part of our day-to-day living or our lifestyle whatsoever. But I can remember as a little girl, I was always drawn to the light. There was something about the Lord. I used to have, do you know those old school paintings where Jesus is knocking at the door? Somehow I got a hold of that, and I taped it to the back of my door when I was maybe 10 years old. So there was always this drawing to the light. And so, life happens. I get caught up in my father's issues, let's just say issues of perversion, and I become a victim of incest. And that lasted for about 10 years. And I was a shell of a person. I had to live this very secretive life that this was going on within my home. And on top of that, he was extremely abusive to my mother and I. And so there was a lot of darkness in our home, and there was a lot of domestic violence in our home. And it wasn't actually until high school that things came to a head. It actually happened because my father found out that I had a boyfriend, that I was like keeping a secret. And when that happened, I'll spare the details, but he almost killed me. And it was then that in Chicago, our Department of Children, Family and Services is called DCFS, and DCFS stepped in. They took me away from my family. And it was during that time that things started to fall apart in my life. And then at that point, DCFS only knew about the physical abuse. And within maybe a week or two, I guess based off some things that I was saying and things that I was conveying to them about my father, they put two and two together. And I had a moment, and this is kind of when I started to see the hand of the Lord working. Now, in retrospect, then I don't think I fully realized what was happening, but I remember the two detectives were looking at me, and they said, "Vanessa, we know that something else is happening, but we can't say it for you. You have to say it for yourself." And there was something about that moment. It was like, I don't know how to explain it. It's only happened a couple of times in my life, but it's like something dawns on you. And I realized that this was a moment that was set up for me. Like a divine orchestrated moment. And I could sense it, even though again, I wasn't a believer at that point, but I could sense like, now is your time. I could
Wow.
feel that, I could sense that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yes, my father has been sexually abusing me for 10 years. And in that, they got up, they shot up out of their seats, and they started taking pictures, I remember, and alerted, I think, my mom about. Anyway, by the time I got home, my father had emptied all the bank accounts, took all the jewelry, and fled. He was gone. So I never really had that justice piece there for me, but God is our justice, right? And he's our deliverer. So I'm 16 at the time, and I just had this clear sense, even though all this chaos has just broke out in my life, I kept hearing, "This is my doing. This is my doing." And that is not, like, I don't talk like that, especially a 16-year-old doesn't sound like that. This is my doing. But I carried that in my heart. And even still, again, chaos broke out at this point. It's just me. I have a little sister. My mother is severely depressed. I'll leave home to go to school. She's on the couch sleeping. Come home from school. She's on the couch sleeping. I had to start providing for the family. I had to get a worker's permit. I had to start working to, in essence, provide for the family. And so there was no time for healing. They had suggested I go to counseling. Nobody's thought to make that happen for me.
Yeah.
So there is this what we call this parentification in counselor language and psychology. It's where a child has to become something that they're not ready developmentally to do, and will become a provider for the family, be sort of the strength of the family. Yeah. Even though I have all of this unhealed, trauma, real trauma that I've been living, double lives and all that. And so I almost don't graduate high school because I get really involved into drugs. I am smoking weed all the time, at the bus stop, cutting classes, to the point that I almost didn't graduate high school. But I had this very real vision that I wanted to become an FBI agent. Again, because I was seeking out that sense of justice. I wanted to get bad guys. Yeah. And so this was an identity that I was chasing, was I want to be the justice that I didn't. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Batman, right? But I want to be the justice that I didn't receive, and be that for others. And so part of that was enlisting into the United States Marine Corps. And so I did what I needed to do because this one physics class, let me tell you, he was giving me a hard time. And he was going to fail me. And I remember very clearly, I went to him when the school day was out, and I said, listen, I have to pass this class because I'm going on the buddy program with my best friend. We're going to we're decided we need to leave to boot camp. And he was not going to let that happen. And I said, I will not let you down. He turned it into a D for me. Okay. And I turned that D into a B. Wow. And that was the beginning of, because part of my upbringing was my father he used very disparaging remarks growing up. So he wouldn't just call me stupid. He would use the word stupid as my name. Hey, stupid, right? So you begin to believe that because that's part of your developmental makeup, and you internalize that. And so that was part of God chipping away at, no, you're not stupid. You're smart. You're intelligent. And so I leave the United States Marine Corps. That's a whole journey. That's a whole other story. By the time I get back, because they do a number on you, being a female in the United States Marine Corps is not easy. And so, and anger is celebrated in the Marine Corps. Violence is celebrated. And when we talk to each other, we say kill as a way of motivating one another, that we are trained to kill. We're trained to sleep with rifles. And so I already had anger issues because all this pent up anger from my childhood. Then I go into the Marine Corps. Well, that was all applauded. That was all reinforced. That was like, yes, you're made for this. So by the time I come out of the Marine Corps, I'm a hot mess. And so one night I come back, we're over in this Wicker Park area in Chicago. You'll probably be familiar with it. And I start turning to alcohol to cope. And at that point, it was just, I'm just going out with my girls, but I'm consuming alcohol like crazy. And we went to a friend's house, and it was like 4:00 in the morning, and I'm crying and crying and crying to the point that when I wake up, I have a hernia in my stomach from having cried so hard. Just crying, I was so hardened at that point. So this is probably like emotion, pent up emotion for years. Because in the Marine Corps, I mean, they teach you to stifle your emotion. There's no room for emotion and feelings in the Marine Corps. So I'm crying so hard and probably so dehydrated that I wake up with a hernia. I go to the hospital, and I finally I had no choice but to slow down. And in that, it was at the hospital that I know now it was the Holy Spirit began to draw me to himself. I just had a very, how can I say, it was like an urgency in my spirit that came down. It was almost like an awakening, like if Tinkerbell came and just sprinkled something, all of a sudden I was like awakened that I need God. And so that was the beginning stages, because at this point I'm working for the Department of Defense. There's a Mormon there, and she's hearing about this, and she's like, oh, you need to come to temple with me. So I'm going to temple with her. Again, I grew up Catholic, and I'm going to Mass one Sunday. I'm going to temple one Sunday. And I just have this, I'm gonna do this thing for God. I'm gonna find God, right? And so I'm wearing skirts to temple.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to
find, yeah.
Right. I'm not aware of their doctrine. I just know the things of like Mormonism, like how beautiful the family system looks, right? Again, I'm not aware of the doctrinal issues here. Oh, yes. Okay. But through that all, I'm simultaneously going to temple and Mass on Sundays. I bump into a friend at this one mall in Chicago where you always bump into somebody you know.
Yes.
There's always one of those.
It's like a small family. I felt like when I was in Chicago, everybody knew everyone. Like, so everybody was interconnected.
It's so true. Chicago's big,
it's
but it's
true.
also small at
Yeah,
the same time.
small. Yeah.
So, and he's like, listen, oh, you're doing the church thing. You need to come to my church. I'm going to 16 churches, Natasha. Why not try another
Wow.
one?
Right.
Okay. What I don't know is this is a Holy Spirit-filled church. So I go to this man's church, and it's still to this day, the memory I have is it was like as if people were doing cartwheels. Okay. Because temple and mass, it's very, we kneel, we'll raise a hand, we'll kneel. It's very quiet and it's very, I don't know, there isn't much freedom in those atmospheres. In this place, I just remember people were jumping and hollering, and I was like taken aback. I was like, this is crazy. I don't remember a word the pastor said. I was so just like shook, like this is so wild. It just felt like wild. And then after that service, a woman comes up to me. She takes my hand and she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, I just feel your pain. And I'm freaked out. I'm like, I don't know what is happening right now.
Yeah.
And she just starts speaking into my life. And she starts saying prophetically that God is going to use me to heal others and all of these things about my life. And she said something that was very key. On the way there, because it was a long drive, I remember thinking to myself, and I'm doing all this, what if God is not even real? And at the end of all that she had spoken over me, she said, and God knows that you questioned him today, and he wants you to know that he is real. I was so shook that on the way out, the guy, my old buddy, caught up. He's like, hey, what you think about the service? I was like, don't talk to me. You betrayed me. How dare you tell this woman my business? Yeah. Because that's how accurate she was.
She was, wow.
And I left there and I was so angry.
For sure.
And I'm just reeling with anger. And as that started to dissipate, I thought, wait a second. But I thought that. And only God could know our thoughts. And that was that. And then by the time I came home, it was all strategically set up by the Lord. My sister said, hey, somebody invited us to this church just down the street. And I said, well, let's go. We'll go this Sunday. That church is where in January of 2019, I heard the gospel clear for the first time. I raised my hand, not knowing it was one of those setups, if you want to live for the Lord, raise your hand. I'm like, hey, there's only like 5 people raising their hand. It was, that setup, right? And they're like, okay, if you raise your hand, I want you to go ahead and come on up. And I'm like, man, okay. Well, that church is, again, where I heard the gospel first. That's where I met my husband. Wow. At that church, serving, doing leadership. And the pastors are his uncle and aunt. So that it was just it was a long-term setup from the Lord. And I am so glad that he intervened in my life. And it was one of those stories where it was at my rock bottom. It was at my rock bottom that I saw the light. And I sensed that inkling of the Lord drawing me. But nobody ever shared the gospel with me. And even in the Marine Corps, I remember I was wanting to go to church. I remember that desire. And that's not a desire most Marines have. It was always the Lord drawing himself to me, drawing me to himself, I should say.
Yeah. No, that is so powerful. And I hear you've said, this word multiple times, the word light. And I would love for you to just even share, after experiencing that moment of hearing the gospel for the first time and being able to look back at your life and see the moments where light was creeping in and light was coming to overtake the darkness, how did you continue to follow the light? Because I'm sure once you came into the knowledge of the Lord, you went into a process of healing, right? To where, God was wanting you now to, to come fully into his light as a daughter of God. So how did you keep answering that invitation to continue to grow in the light, in the knowledge of the Lord?
Great question. I call it my incubation season. So in this moment in time, I'm working for the Department of Defense, and I shared already that I was wanting to attain an identity, right? I wanted to be Angelina Jolie in Tomb Raider. You know what I'm saying? That strong woman that nobody can mess with, because I didn't have a voice as a child. And so I was wanting that sense of empowerment. And so as the Lord intervened right when I was already in my third phase to become an FBI agent. I was already interviewing with the CIA. I was getting ready.
Wow.
I was for this plan that I created for myself.
Wow.
Of justice and strength and being that woman that I wanted to be. And so it all happened simultaneously. It was just like Paul. I mean, in one moment, Paul is spewing murderous threats at Christians. He steps away for a bit, and that misplaced ambition is now rooted in the Lord's vision. So that same ambition that I had to become, God just took me. He told me to sit down, and I sat down, right? And that is a called season. And what that looked like was my top secret clearance disappearing from the system one day. And you cannot go to work. You cannot step foot into a facility that you don't have clearance for. And I remember they were like, we just don't know what happened. Your clearance just disappeared out of the system. And to get a clearance,
I can only imagine for the Department of Defense, the FBI. I mean,
forget it. It could take months up to a year, because they have to do background checks. They have to meet with people in your life and interview them. So it was like, man, we're sorry, but you can't come into this. We have to see if we could work something out. They literally they had to meet me outside of the building and give you a box of my stuff. I couldn't even collect my own things.
Wow.
So, and that's how you know it's the Lord. When you hear things like, this has never happened before, whether at the doctor's office, right? I mean, what you mean this never happened before? That's how you know it's the Lord most of the time, okay?
Yeah. Miracle, yeah.
Yes. And so, and this was a miracle, because something like this, it's uncommon, right? And so, I found myself unemployed. And in that season, the pastor kept saying, listen, if you are in between jobs, we would love for you to volunteer at the church. And I was like, well, it just so happens. So I started volunteering at the church. So I'm at the church every day, just doing whatever they needed me to do. Help with Meals on Wheels, help with the youth. I mean, I was just there serving, and that became my new Marine Corps. I was just there as a Marine, just serving the generals and serving, it was just it just shifted into a new environment for me. And a lot of that was, there was some hardships, because I worked with a lot of men, and that was very common. But the pastor's wife was not having that. She was like, no, she started teaching me, hey, you need to have boundaries in this, in A, B, and C. And I just was like, oh my gosh, like my world was shook. I was like, I don't understand, but okay. But that was my incubation season. God was providing through unemployment, but I was at the church every single day. I was at prayer night every single week. I was in 3 services every single week, and just serving. I was a part of every ministry that you can think of. And then when my unemployment was done, the Lord had a job set up for me, and that was in social work. And that was the beginning to my journey into the mental health field.
Wow. And I just love, being able to just even hear your testimony and story in depth. I keep even hearing, because you also use the word justice multiple times, right? And how before you heard the gospel, before you leaned into the light, into the truth that God had for you, you had your own personal definition of what justice looked like according to, even the culture, according to the anger that you had felt. And then the Lord just turned that around, and he's like, okay, I'm calling you to bring justice to the hearts and to the souls of people from the inside out, right? So I would love to hear how justice, how that word evolved in your life, because you did end up going back to school, I'm sure, and, getting licensed as a clinical therapist. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. So it picks up right where we just left off. So here I am, I'm working for this organization in the north side of Chicago, and they treat elderly people, they help elderly people, and these social workers are assigned to provide counseling services for these folks in their last stages of life. And so I was surrounded by social workers, and they're a different species. They're just a different kind of people. And remember, I was a government gal. So I come from this warrior spirit, kind of like, female drill instructors, very just hardcore. And again, no time for feelings. It's all about the mission. We live a missional lifestyle to these women who are very empathetic, feeling people. And so simultaneously, again, there's a pastor who starts seeing something in me, and I start, remember, I'm in every ministry at this point, and I start serving in the intercessory prayer team. And part of the intercessory prayer team ministry was helping people go through something called the Steps to Freedom in Christ by Neil T. Anderson. And it's a deliverance curriculum, essentially. And so she starts training me up in that. And it's kind of like it can fit into biblical counseling, but it's integrated with a deliverance piece. There's a lot of like renouncing of things, yes, but it's also theologically a sound. So I love that integration of things, and I started helping people go through these 3-hour sessions of just assessing their lives and helping people go through these renunciations and essentially experiencing deliverance in these sessions. So I'm getting trained in deliverance ministry and biblical counseling, and I start serving with youth. And so I started finding that youth are coming up to me and they're saying, I'm cutting myself. Now, back in my day, in order to cope, we drank a 40 and we smoked weed, and we just, that's what we did. So I'm not understanding how you have the courage or how you have the capacity to actually harm yourself. So I'm like, what is this? I've never heard of self-harm at this point. And so I start looking into that. And then I had said something to a social worker and I had said something, I had noticed something. And she said, you know what, Vanessa? She's like, have you ever thought about being a therapist? Because I just really could see that in you. And I was like, no, I haven't. And then when she left, I Googled what a therapist was, because I didn't know what a therapist was, because my culture does not share. We don't share details, intimate details of our life. We keep it hush hush because we don't want to look some kind of way. And, so I'm over here and I'm like, what is a therapist? I didn't know. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's kind of like what I've been doing. And I start just diving into what is a therapist? There's a psychological component, and I've been being trained up in this spiritual component. And I started sensing that this was the direction that the Lord had for me. So that's how I ended up making that shift.
Yeah. No, I love that, because what I also see, just even listening to your journey, is that God sent strategic people into your life to highlight areas or just even highlight gifts and, natural talents that you had that you weren't even aware of. So it just even shows the importance of being in spaces and in communities where you can be seen, and I think it's so important even for our audience right now, to where we have a lot of women who have dreams, they have desires, they feel God's nudging them to do something, but they just haven't been able to be in a safe space for that to be unveiled or unlocked. So I love just even with your mission of your counseling center and your mission to help not just women, but couples and teens truly experience breakthrough. Would you be able to share with our community right now what you enjoy the most about being able to walk, people into the breakthrough, that they're looking for? Because I think sometimes when you've been struggling with something for so long and it's become even a part of your identity, right? It's hard to actually see that God has freedom for you on the other side. So what do you enjoy, the most when it comes to being able to walk your clients into a lifestyle of freedom and breakthrough?
So good. I think the best part of what I get to do, I was in that incubation season, I would just be hunkered down in my cubicle and I would be literally reading the Bible. I became just obsessed with the Word of God. And I just started working through it during lunchtime, eating my lunch, reading the Bible. But it's when working with those folks, working with people through counseling, through therapy, through coaching, it's the aha moment.
Yeah.
It's the aha moment. It's the Joseph. It's when Joseph is confronted with his brothers and he's like, no. What the enemy intended for evil, God meant for good. It's
Thank
that.
You, Lord, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Where it's just like, no. You thought you had something on me. You thought that that this was going to finish me, but actually this is the beginning of my story. So it's that. It's helping folks get to the root of what it is that they're experiencing, and then helping them understand how the Lord is going to use them through that. Not necessarily, we don't always necessarily have to like my past. Yeah, I mean, I'm been healed from it. Does it make me sad sometimes? Of course, right? But it has shaped who I am, and I own that. It's God uses those experiences for His glory, and there's a depth in me, and there's there'll always be a healthy brokenness in me because of what I went through. And so helping them not forsake the past, but helping them understand that it could be part of God's vision for their future.
Man, that is so good because just that simple, not even simple, but just that powerful understanding of God. Oh my gosh, I went through all this pain. I went through all this hell. Oh my gosh. But look, I'm using this pain now to help set others free.
Yes.
And there's freedom that even comes from owning your story and owning that, hey, this happened to me, but it did not break me.
Yes.
And I just think there's such a beauty that comes from that. And I think just a level of maturity as well, because even for me personally, like I've been walking with the Lord for 20 plus years, right? And there's still times to where I'm just like, God, I don't understand how this part of my story is going to make sense now. I don't understand, but there's just something so beautiful about the providence of God, the sovereignty of God, is that He is going to cause that Joseph moment.
Yes.
It's really up to us to continue to walk with Him, to choose Him, to put ourselves in environments to where we can be able to see clearly what He's, trying to get to us and everything. So,
100%.
Yeah, this is just so good, Vanessa. And just even talking with you, and I'm sure our audience can also even, relate to just being able to sit with you. There's such a grace and an anointing on your life to really help settle the hearts of, men and women. Like talking with you, it's very calming. It's very much, you just feel safe. So I would love for you to share, because I know even before we went into our conversation that you talked briefly about just the season that God has had you in. And I would love for us to close with this, of just with what you've been going through in the last couple of years. What is God like teaching you? And and through what he's teaching you, would love for you to just, quickly encourage our audience.
Sure.
That's a lot. It's like a whole message or like a preaching message, but would love to hear your heart. Yeah.
So in the last 5 years, and I'll try to condense this, we went through some major shifts. We were church planning for 6 years. Again, inner city of Chicago, we had a very tight community. God called us to step out in faith to Georgia, where we knew not a soul. We had no work lined up for us. It was not one of those like, hey, we're just going to transition and there's going to be this new something waiting for us. We just felt called to leave, go down south, and the Lord orchestrated everything to where we were able to get a home. We've got 1 acre of land. It's a blessing in that moment. God was calling us to a season of rest. And that was difficult because my husband and I are very ambitious, missional driven people. And he was like, no, take a seat because I have a blessing for you. But we couldn't understand that. And so part of this environment that God, like as I'm looking out the window right now, I mean, we live in a forest. It's beautiful. All of Georgia is sort of tucked into a forest. But in those, we had, as doing the church planning thing, all that, we had discovered that we were having issues with infertility. And so for 10 years, we dealt with that. We come to Georgia, spontaneously, miraculously, we conceive. All glory to God, because all the doctors said it was not possible. And we did try all the things. And so we've been learning about rest, the power of rest, to rest even for the ambitious ones and how that looks like. We've been learning that. And then when I did conceive, I had a wonderful pregnancy, but I had a very traumatic postpartum experience. I mean, it started at the hospital. And so I won't go into detail, but I left the hospital with PTSD. I had 2 abdominal surgeries. I woke up in the ICU, and the enemy was really, we just have experienced so much spiritual warfare during both pregnancies. There have been just some clear attacks from the enemy in my most vulnerable moments of life. And so I've been learning about postpartum mental health issues, postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD. I had to deal with all of that. I had to go through a deliverance moment because I learned that trauma can invite and sort of expose you to things of the enemy. And so that was a whole like, hey, what's going on here? Again, there's just so much has happened. And I've learned so much. And I think through it all, I would say the headline of this past 5 years is, which has always kind of been God's question to me, is, am I enough? Vanessa, am I enough in this season? Even when you don't feel me, am I enough? Even when you don't see me, am I enough? And so that has been, that's been the season. Even if the ministry is not what you thought it would be, am I still enough? And that'll humble you.
Yeah, that'll humble you real quick. And I think too, but it's so interesting how, because I just feel like even in the last, I would say probably like 5 to 7 years, there has been a sense of just the world has had to slow down, right? When COVID happened. And then I think too, of course, what the enemy meant for evil, right? God is turning into good. So I think that there is this place to where God is really teaching his people how to rest, like you were saying, and then also how to make him enough, and really drawing us into this space of simplicity, right? Because I think in our society, it's very much like, what can you get next? What are you doing? How are you building? All these different kind of questions. And it's like, man, God is not, I don't know, I would say like God, he can heal you in a moment or whatever, but I think he's really into the process. He's really into the journey. It's just like, so for us, we're trying to be like genies. We're trying to, and honestly, the thought that's coming into my mind is, I feel like we be doing like witchcraft with our lives sometimes, right? Because we're just trying to speak stuff into existence. If it doesn't happen when we think it should happen, let's say we fasted for 40 days, we're believing for breakthrough. it doesn't happen the way that we want, we say, hey, God, you're not enough. And there is this drawing, this coming back, like you said, this pilgrimage of his true sons and daughters. Like, who wants to be found worthy? Who wants to be found holy? Who wants to ascend the mountain of the Lord, right? Like those with pure hands and a pure heart. So it is this place of God is able to use your pain, but he's a good father. He doesn't want you to keep working after that pain. He wants to hold you. He wants to love you tenderly and then send you out. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
Yes, and amen. One of the things that I'm working through right now is in the Christian communities, we like to say, yeah, we doing big things for God. And how much selfish ambition is in that statement, because that's how I used to be. I want to do big things for God, right? Listen, okay.
That's the language. That's the Christianese language, though. Like, yeah.
Yes. And again, I think that we can miss the ambition, the selfish ambition, the misplaced ambition in that but it's for God. But it's for God. So God's going to bless it, right? And the Lord has been showing me that we don't do big things for God. He does it through you. God will do the big things through you, through your submission, through your surrender, through your faithfulness. God will do big things through your life. Yeah. And in that beauty, because social media has brought about, just chronic envy and jealousy, because you're looking at their highlight reels, right? Ain't no low light reels.
No.
Okay. It's rare that people are very, honest and transparent, for obvious reasons. But yeah, that's the season I've been in, and I'm thankful to God for it, because he disciplines those that he loves, right? He's correcting. In his correction, there is love, especially as a parent now. As I explain something to my toddler, right, who is a toddler developmentally, when I explain something, I'm saying, I'm telling you this, I want you to know, because I don't want you to have fun, but it's because I love you and I want you to be safe. Yeah. And when I say that to my toddler, I'm hearing the Lord at the same time.
Yeah, it's so much. We could keep going on. It's just because as we were talking, I was thinking about, I was driving yesterday and I was listening to this message, and literally it was just like, this just dropped in my spirit. It's like, and I felt like it was the Lord like asking me again that same question, like, am I enough? And then even like, hey, because sometimes I feel like as humans, or just whatever, just as people, we can walk ourselves into deception to where we come up with this character or this vision of ourselves that we think the Lord has approved, because we're doing all of the right things, in like air quotes. But it's just like, what are the right things? Are they biblical? Are they cynical? Are they impure? It's just like, am I measuring my thoughts? Am I measuring my actions according to the word of God? Am I truly bringing, allowing my life to be open for examination, And I think, like you said, he disciplines the ones that he loves. So I think too, it's even people having a revelation of what being loved is. And that love is truly a commitment. It's a commitment to every part of you, like in the good, the bad, and the ugly. So,
yes,
it's making you think of that. Yeah,
yeah. Part of the is God enough. I guess some of the side roads to that revelation that God has been just continually asking both my husband and I is. It comes down to identity. And I feel very strongly about, like, in my time working with folks, I've learned that there is something very powerful about growing up, right? In First Peter, it talks about growing up in your salvation, and what that looks like. And a lot of it has to deal with your identity in the Lord. Your how to be faithful as a believer. And going back to what we were talking about with just ambition in the Lord and being faithful is, again, we were talking about Christianese. A lot of the things that we talk about, doing big things for God, and being on fire for God is another one. Being on fire for God. And as you look throughout the scriptures, does God come and does he set folks ablaze with, yes, he does, right? But really what he's looking for is faithfulness. Because when you are locked up and because you were preaching the Lord Jesus Christ, faithfulness is what's going to sustain you in those seasons. And so, yeah, I think the way that they're interconnected, right, is because we want to speak things of the Lord. We want to do things. We would do big things for God because of identity, because it's a strange way of fueling, again, that identity and the vision that we have for ourselves. But really what God is looking for is faithfulness. And faithfulness needs to be key to our identity. And that's actually what I want to start doing. So shameless plug, I want to start doing some webinars, Natasha, and I want about your identity in the Lord. Like, this is what I'm so passionate about right now. I want to call it Heaven Made. And I want to help folks understand, if you can just grab a hold of the identity, this new creation that you have become and all that entails, then all the Christianese and everybody, what they're doing on social media and what all the world is pressuring you to become will fade away. If you could just realize who it is that God has called you to be and what that looks like.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Yeah. So many thoughts. I mean, I think we may have to continue the conversation off of the episode, but no, that's so rich. And I think, definitely for our listeners is that we hope that, through today's conversation, and this was our prayer even before we came on, is that we would, give glory to God through the words that we speak. And I definitely know that through our conversation today, that many of you were provoked and encouraged, to seek God if you've never sought him before, and to really come into that place of understanding. So thank you so much, Vanessa, for being on today's podcast. And we'd love for you to even share how people can stay connected with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm most active on Instagram, and my @ is @Vanessa Cruz. And I have a podcast. And if you go to anywhere, Apple, Spotify, you just type in Vanessa Cruz, you'll see my face pop up. And I've been trying to, there's been that season where I was just kind of sat down. So you're going to see a gap. That's when I was becoming a mother and all those good things. But I'm back and active on there. And then if anybody's interested in coaching, you can go to my website, which is vanessacruz.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Vanessa, for being a part of the Called Woman podcast. And we'll talk soon.
Anytime. Bye.
What did you think of today's episode? I hope you loved it as much as I did. If you found any value in this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you downloaded this episode by hitting that little down arrow wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have any big takeaways from today's episode, feel free to share it with a friend that you think would benefit from this episode. I absolutely love hearing how you feel about the episodes that I'm sharing and creating for you. So feel free to tag me on social media with any truths or breakthroughs that you have received. I love reading what you find the most value in. Thank you again for being here today, and I pray that you felt the love of God through today's episode. And always remember that you belong in God's story.